I never saw anyone who looked or felt like me when I was younger. And so I try to be like as open as possible so that my students see an adult with those experiences. So like if they do feel that way, even if they don't realize it quite yet, like they see someone who is thriving, still struggling because we're the world right now. But like, you can make it to be a queer adult, right? Like I didn't think that I would ever get to that point. And younger Ace like needed to see somebody.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast presented by Kaitlin, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, co-founder of Kaitlin, Kaitlin Johnstone. Let's dive in.
Wake up.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Kindness Is pod. I did not know when we recorded this episode that it was going to come out the day after Trans Day of Visibility. I got to sit down with two incredibly epic humans who were fighting for inclusive education. Skye Tooley and Schwarz met via Instagram, as so many people in the social media world have, and together they have formed an amazing Patreon called Growing Outside the Binary, where you will find tons and tons of inclusive educational resources. Skye, they, them, is a trans, non-binary, anti-bias, and social justice educator in Los Angeles, California. For the last 9 years, they have worked to recreate elementary curriculum with a social justice focus and have worked to actively engage their learners in lessons surrounding identity, diversity, equity, action, and justice. Ace is also a trans non-binary middle school science teacher. They've been teaching science for 9 years and love incorporating social justice elements within the science classroom. Ace uses social media platforms like Instagram to help educators, caregivers, and administrators create LGBTQ plus inclusive environments. I am just so incredibly proud of the work they are both doing, and I hope each and every one of you can take a little bit away from the conversation that we had together. We're going to get into all the things today, but I want you to tell everyone first what inspired you both to get into education.
I grew up in a very religious household, and in that, my parents worked a lot with the kids side of the church. So they were like the kids' church pastors and things like that. For those of you who don't know Christianity, kids tend to go into another section to learn about the Christian stuff on the kids' version, while the adults are learning on the other side. I was always helping out in that space, helping with kids and even like doing some of the lessons. So when I went to college, I actually was planning on going into teaching, but more so like teaching English as a second language or working in that capacity. And I ended up working with children in that space and actually like teaching, going to different spaces and helping teach. And I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. I think actually I want to get my credential and lean into public education. And so that's how that happened. So I always knew I wanted to teach in some capacity. And then I just kind of fell into teaching on an elementary level. So, yeah.
Gosh, what is it about queer kids and church? So my story also tangentially relates to church, but I wasn't actually supposed to be a teacher. My dad owned a soda company, and it was kind of thought that like I would take over said soda company. And I realized I hated the idea of being in an office all day, especially after doing an internship where my mom worked. And I got the chance to teach Sunday school at church and vacation Bible school and just fell in love with it. Now, mind you, I taught 3 and 4-year-olds, right? So we're talking like pre-K. But when I went into education, I started looking at education schools. I looked for middle school programs, and to this day, still have no idea how or why that jump happened. But I went into college with a middle level, so grades 4 to 8, with an English concentration, just English. And then this was back in like 2011, and the teaching market was so hard to get into. So I was I should add another concentration because you could do up to 2. And graduate on time. I was like, I should add something to make myself more marketable. You couldn't do 2 humanities. Social studies was out, and I'm not the biggest fan of math. And so I didn't think I should be teaching math. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll do science. And like had to take every intro science class at the college, fell in love with it, and I still love English. But after student teaching, I never really taught English again, except for like some enrichment classes. And I taught for science for 5 years in a public school, 7th grade, and then I transitioned to an independent school the last 4 years teaching. This year I'm sixth, seventh, and eighth, but usually I'm just sixth and seventh. So yay, church, I guess.
I was just going to say, I wasn't expecting the conversation to go this way. However, it's really interesting that you both came from that background. Do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about that? And I believe I know the answer to this, but whether or not you're both still practicing Christians.
Yeah. So actually in the middle of teaching, in the middle of my first master's program, I actually went to seminary, got a whole certificate from church college, in
Wow.
youth and family ministry. So I have that certification. But no, I'm not practicing anymore.
What about you, Skye?
I grew up in kind of the more cult side of Christianity, so that was like still unpacking a lot of that, because that's the life of unpacking at this point. But so there was a lot of me just like trying to slowly remove myself from that as I moved into my adult years. So I definitely like had kind of that white saviorism complex that kind of still hung around. So originally, like, I was thinking about missionary work and stuff too as I was finishing my degree. And that's when but then as I was finishing my degree, I was also like, this is like not making a lot of sense. Like, why this isn't like, why are we like going over here when we have all these problems here? And like, why is this not being solved here? Like, why is, the church not doing X, Y, and Z when, like, so like the doctrine that I'd been told my whole life and instilled on me was not lining up with the world I was now seeing, now that I was outside of the very, protected sphere that I grew up in. So that's kind of what pushed me to really reevaluate Christianity. And I stepped away from the church, but still like believed it to some degree, and was like, okay, I don't believe what the church is, but the doctrine of what Jesus said, like, I'm like believing in that. And then as I moved further and further away, I was like, no, none of it. So yeah, that's been my journey, still on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all are, right? I couldn't even answer what I believe or like whatsoever. If you were to ask me today, I'd be like, I don't know. Like, I feel like a little spiritual, like, healing going on within me, but I can't even equate that to any sort of organized religion. That's for sure. So I just find it really interesting, because I also have noted that any guests that I have had on who are part of the LGBTQ plus community have grown up with like very, very, very religious families, and now are not practicing. Like, it's 100% across the board. So I always find that an interesting thing to ask why that is. So I appreciate you both sharing that. I am wondering, because it also sounds as though you both potentially grew up pretty sheltered in the same sort of upbringing from what I'm hearing, but now are massive advocates for inclusive education. Why is that so important?
So I mean, multiple reasons. I mean, I guess, like, and I know Ace will speak to this too, is a huge part of it is seeing the impact of teaching it and wishing, that we had that growing up. I grew up I was in private school and homeschooled and public, so I had kind of the experience of all three. And just thinking back on multiple instances in my childhood where I did have very legitimate questions, but no one to answer them, or it would immediately be shut down as like, that's not okay to think about, or, that's not biblical or whatnot, or that's a sin, even was used to like think in that way. So having that space in the classroom, one, to like present these things is really important, and then two, to create an understanding and empathy. Speaking definitely within elementary side, because students have these questions and they hear these things and they don't necessarily get to express them or talk about them, or feel safe to express them and talk about them, or just even learning about them too is really important. Because like in my 5th grade classroom, even just this last week, and I was talking about it with some teachers, trying to push them to come to this understanding that my 5th graders are using language that they think is okay to use because no one else has taught them that it's not. So they're using very ableist language. They're using racist language. And they're of course using homophobic language because it's just in our society. And so I was talking with like teachers of like, hey, we need to like address this because it's not like to shame them. Like we shouldn't be shaming these kids for this language, but we should be presenting them with, hey, this is why we shouldn't use it. Here's the history on why. And it's this kind of complacency that I'm trying to push back on within education, because we all, especially in California, like I will speak to California especially, we have the tools here in California and the protections to teach these things that we still have a lot of teachers that don't. So it's that inclusivity is really important, because I have seen my kids go from not understanding or having kind of an indifference to a group of people to a strong advocate support by the end of the year, like wanting change, wanting more understanding. Like for LA, you know, we have a huge houseless problem, not because people don't want to work, but because we have capitalism. That's a whole other podcast. Like it's so like, but talking about it with my students, they're able to understand it, and they have now become very big advocates on fair housing and rent control and these things, and they actually can speak to it and understand it. So that inclusivity is really important because it creates space for these conversations, and it creates understanding too, and also creates joy. Like a lot of my students are able to celebrate these parts of their identity and parts of themselves in the classroom when before they haven't. Like I had one of my students is Filipino, and they were like so excited to just like talk about their history and their culture during Filipino History Month, you know? And so just giving that space too, and saying like, oh, we see you and we acknowledge all the things that make up who you are, is really important in our classroom. And that should always include our queerness as well, not just our race, but every aspect. It should include our neurodivergency, it should include our disabilities, it should include race, and it should include our gender, it should include all of these things, right? So really thinking on those aspects of what makes up our students and not ignoring those parts, because then we're saying that part is not as important, so we're not going to talk about it. You know, whether you said that or just not talked about it, it gives a very clear message. And I know as a kid, I got that message all the time. You know, I grew up as a female, as a girl, so I was told like that gender was not important. It wasn't as valid as other people's gender, right? And then I was also I was also shown that being queer or liking anyone outside of the realm of male, right, is not okay. So lots of different messages, whether they were explicitly told to me or not.
You put that so well, and I think the only piece I'll add to that is that like I never saw anyone who looked or felt like me when I was younger, especially someone who's asexual and non-binary. So there's like that additional layer to it as well. Like I was told that not being interested in people or wanting relationships was like not normal, and there was like a lot of pressure there. And so I try to be like as open as possible so that my students see an adult with those experiences. So like if they do feel that way, even if they don't realize it quite yet, like they see someone who is thriving, still struggling because we're the world right now, but like you can make it to be a queer adult, right? Like I didn't think that I would ever get to that point. And younger Ace like needed to see somebody. And so that's just kind of like why I try to be as like open and authentic as possible. And then making sure that like, I unlearn all of my biases, because I did grow up very sheltered. And so we never talked about things like race and gender, and, the wide variety of identity markers. And so like doing my own internal unlearning and relearning has been really crucial. And then just like sharing it in accessible, developmentally appropriate ways with students, like where it fits and feels natural. Like we are learning about genetics in 7th grade right now, and we talked about clownfish and how they can change sex. And that led to a conversation on, is taking testosterone illegal? And in their brains, they were thinking steroids. And they were like, well, can it also be for like other things? And so we had a whole conversation about transgender athletes because of this one lesson. And it helped break down some misconceptions. And so having those honest conversations has been really important, because I think kids are parroting a lot of what they hear at home or on TV and TikTok, depending on like what side of TikTok you're on.
Oh
and
my
so
goodness. Don't get on the wrong side.
Oh my
Sorry.
gosh. No, but seriously though,
It's wild.
And so like that's why and I'm in the privileged position of like my school is fairly supportive, and so I feel like I can have these conversations, and if I can, I should. Like I feel like I should. And it's important that I do. So yeah, that's what all that Skye's, because Skye put that so well. So
It's interesting to me that you are both in areas of the country where you are semi-protected by what you teach, I should say, somewhat, right? I mean, I'm coming from the standpoint of having been an educator in the state of Florida, so it's
yeah.
it's a much different world, right? Like I had the immense privilege of picking up and saying, okay, I know I never want to teach here again. I know that I don't want my daughter going through this school system. I'm gonna basically pinpoint anywhere on the map that I can find to get as far away from Florida as possible. So I say that also understanding how difficult it must be for you both to teach inclusively. And I appreciate that you do, because children need to see you. You needed to see you
Mhm.
when you were younger. And Skye, you brought up something that kind of leads into my next question. You said we have to talk about all identities. And that is something where even in the books that we donate, like I still have a lot of growth, right? Like I still have a lot of room, particularly when it comes to representing the disabled community. I know that that's been like an area of growth for me. And I think something that gets in all of our ways time and time again is our unwillingness to grow, right? Like that ego gets in the way and we say, hey, no, I know this and I'm not going to open my eyes to something new. And I want to know why you both think that that could be potentially harmful or dangerous for your students or just, countrywide. Why is that a harmful way of thinking?
Yeah. And I think we'd also be remiss in not naming that publishing companies are also preventing this as well. Like they're mostly publishing white cis het authors, able-bodied authors, and not giving space and voice to diverse perspectives. And so I think it's like a both and kind of a thing. So like part of it is lack of access, and
Mhm.
part of it is like that echo chamber effect. Like we're around people who share our similar views, and we don't want to open up to new views. But I think that people get it's like really hard, that cognitive dissonance where you are introduced to new information, and it scares you, and so you're like, oh, this isn't comfortable, I'm gonna like back away and go back into my little corner of what I'm comfortable with. And like in some cases that might be important, but in other cases where it comes to learning about other folks and other perspectives, like we have to be uncomfortable and recognize that what we might have learned growing up is wrong. And that's okay, right? Like I think a
Mhm.
lot of us grew up getting very different narratives, and so making sure that we have space for that, like that growth and exploration, is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna like just to add on to that because that's basically what I was gonna touch on as well, is like just that we have to like, especially I would say especially as white people, we have to like be okay with taking ownership of the harm that our ancestors or even our parents or grandparents cause. Like we're very close to
Hmm.
the racism that was perpetuated during segregation, and we are consistently perpetuating racism today.
Hmm.
So I think that uncomfortability for specifically for white Americans is something that is definitely coming to a head in the last few years. So I feel like a lot, because we have to acknowledge that the reason why our education profession, speaking to educators, is mainly white is because we pushed out Black educators.
Hmm.
We made sure that when the unions joined, NEA was originally the Black Union, if I remember correctly, and it joined with the white union, and the white union joined with the Black union in order to get money because the Black union was so successful at the time. So we have to acknowledge that our enormous union in itself was formed out of anti-blackness,
Hmm.
and our education system doesn't want Black students to succeed. It doesn't want anyone who's not white cis to succeed. And so we have to, and that's uncomfortable. That can be an uncomfortable place for white educators to sit with, but we have to sit in that because we then will make a better classroom, a better space for the students coming into our space. And that can be a hard thing, but also it's something that honestly we should have done as America 100 years ago, 200 years ago, but we decided just to push past it and be like, okay, it's fine to fly the Confederate flag. It's fine to put up these Confederate monuments. Like any other country you go to, they don't have that. You go to Germany, they don't have statues of the Nazis, you know? So like, but we've normalized that so much here in America. We've also normalized white people pushing back and saying, well, I'm uncomfortable, so therefore I'm not going to teach it. So that's a really important thing I think too we need to touch on when we talk about, you know, pushing back and being okay with learning and these types of things, because in that we've made white people have made it okay to be uncomfortable and then made it okay to take away access from people because they're uncomfortable. You know, like I was just learning about how limited libraries are in certain areas of the country because white people didn't want that access given to Black people. And so they immediately limited the library access. So you've limited library access, not just for Black people, but then also for white people. So now you have this limited access of knowledge. And then we wonder why we have this kind of circular effect happening with people in their own bubble. So it's just like something for all of us to sit with, and something I myself have consistently had to sit with, you know, is like, oh, because we're going to make mistakes too. And I think that's something we all have to be okay with. And sometimes we get very defensive about mistakes. We're like, oh my gosh, you know, I said something racist. And it's like, yeah, we said something racist. Own it. You know, you may not get, I forgive you, and that's okay because you did harm, you know, and we'll have to move forward from that. Doesn't mean like you are a terrible, bad person. It just means you caused harm. You're human. And you now need to take and learn from that and move forward from that. So that's just like kind of the add-on I'll do with ACE is like, that's some things that since we are mainly white in this profession right now, we do have to sit with a lot. So.
Yeah, I think that's such an important reminder. It reminded me of a video that I just did recently about the difference between, again, I'm going to talk about Florida because I know that the most, but if you take a look at two very harmful pieces of legislation, one being the Stop Woke Act, in which, you know, we're taking away the accurate teaching of history, right?
Yep.
And also stating that if a white child is made to feel uncomfortable, then that's something that we don't have to teach, right? About our history. So in the district that I was in, they actually pulled an MLK piece from curriculum because there was a parent who complained about it. And I mean, this is extremely harmful, damaging stuff, right? And then you can also look at the Don't Say Gay bill and how horrific and damaging that has been. But there is something that I notice, and I hope it is okay that I am presenting this to two white queer humans right now, because something, and this is purely observational. Anytime I talk about the Stop Woke Act, right, I either get a TikTok violation, my videos are taken down, there's not as much support, right? Anytime I talk about the Don't Say Gay bill, on the flip side of things, that's not necessarily rooted in anti-blackness, right? I get tons of comments. It's never taken down. So it's something that I just want people to recognize more, that at the basis of everything in this country, there is massive amounts of anti-blackness. And I'm curious what you all think about that, hearing that as people whose identity match to one and not the other.
Yeah. And I think that's why social media cannot be our only form of advocacy.
Yes.
And I think Liz Kleinrock says this all the time. And so I just want to shout out Liz. But she often says, like, what would your social media or what would your advocacy look like if social media went away? And that has really like framed my advocacy work because it's so like anti-black, the companies that run and the algorithms that keep track of all the posts and stuff like that, like it's so interesting in a bad, like it's interesting in a bad way but like, you know, you have to disguise the words by using like at symbols instead of the letter A or whatever, right? And to prevent it from getting banned or taken down. And like our engagement, Skye and I have had many a conversation in frustration over engagement on certain posts that are really important and really necessary, and we both have very large audiences, and these posts won't even break 100 likes, and it's frustrating because a lot of like research and, you know, citing other people like who to go follow and credit their work, and it just gets completely derailed because of exactly like you know, the anti-blackness within the algorithms, or, you know, any, you know, insert many identities here. And so yeah, it is quite frustrating. And you know,
Yeah.
that's why like I encourage activism on social media, but then I also like, what are you doing in your own life? What are the conversations that you're having with the people around you? Like, if someone didn't follow you on social media, would they know what you stand for? And so like, you know, that's just how it has to be right now, because it is such an unreliable like social media in general is such an unreliable platform.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, it's like the just in general too, like it was one of the things we've added on to it is like the transness piece to it.
Hmm.
So some of the amazing creators we follow that are Black and are trans, like it's like double shadow ban for
Yeah.
them too,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And this anti-blackness too, like it's not just on social media, like because like for me, I'm becoming more and more involved with the queer community out here in LA,
Hmm.
and you see it constantly, especially with the white cis gays. Gonna call them out. Like they are some of the most anti-black people I've met,
Hmm.
honestly, and that includes like not gay people. Like the anti-blackness can just be like the stereotypes or just the lack of likes, you know, on the dating apps and things like that. There's just this very much this thing that because we don't discuss it, we don't like what we're doing now, like
Hmm.
because we're not discussing it beyond like the social media or whatnot, it just kind of continues to perpetuate these spaces. And it's frustrating too because as Ace and I have both talked about as well, like the liberation for both groups is tied together. So if we're not advocating for both equally, if you're not liking both posts or whatnot or sharing both when you see them pop up on like your stuff and everything, then what are you doing? Why are you more for one than the other when there is an intersectional identity there for so many people? And they like we know the risks, we know the rates. Like the Trevor Project does great with these things, and we
Hmm.
know in general the data that says like how much more our Black students are policed over our white students. And then you add queerness to that, being queer and Black, how much more they're policed, how much more they're likely to, you know, unalive themselves or do self-harm because of those things and the society they're living in. So like if you're an educator and not acknowledging these both aspects of our kids and their identities, it's like, what are we doing? You know? And then, you know, and like Ace said, we gotta find other ways to advocate and communicate with each other. Like I'm on Signal, which is great. Like I communicate with a lot of different activist group out here on Signal, but
Hmm.
we do need to like think about, you know, advocacy outside of these social medias. Like TikTok most likely will be, I mean, they're focusing on it because they don't like us talking about Palestine on there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You know, that's
Hmm.
why it's come back. They don't like
Yeah.
that. So anytime they don't like something that's happening on a social media, they will find in a capitalist way a way to like hone in and control it even more. So it's like, yes, these apps are amazing and they've helped us grow, but they're also have a lot of space to be controlled and for us to be used and seen in certain ways and our data to be, you know, tagged and whatever. So we have to also be mindful of like how can we continue to create these spaces outside of these apps within our own communities so that way we're not losing access to each other, you know. So
Hmm. And that's so important because prior to moving here, I felt as though all of my community was online. Right. And I get that a lot from people who specifically will reach out to me like, it's great that I have this community online, but I need to find this community within my actual community. Like I need that face to face. And depending on where you are, that could be harder to find.
yeah.
Um, but I'm wondering how people can advocate. How can people, because I know you both have a Patreon, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Together, where you have tons of amazing resources. How can people right now advocate specifically for the trans community outside of being online?
Show up to your school board.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I will say, like, even if you're not sure what to do at your school board, just show up because most likely you'll find people that are there speaking for queer students or speaking for people of the global majority, and you'll be able to find a community there.
Mhm.
Showing up to even just activist things going on. That's the way I've like really leaned into using social media on a personal level for myself is like what's happening in LA in our activist spaces and in our community spaces so I can go and attend those and connect with more people doing this work. So then you're not feeling isolated in it because it's a lot right now to like witness what we're witnessing on multiple levels, not just hear what's happening to queer youth, but also what's happening to queer youth in Palestine and Sudan. And, we have to acknowledge that all of this is connected. So like witnessing all that, and if you're doing it on your own, it's too much, but witnessing it in community is like how we can build up solidarity and build up capacity. So, that would be the first thing I say is like find a space, that you can go to. And if it, even if it's your school board and like there's going to be maybe like a small group there, you don't even have to plan to speak, but show up and see what's going on, because school boards are unfortunately the battleground right now for our rights. And it is for our rights. Whatever is going to go through at school boards is going to eventually go through on a county, on a state, and possibly even a federal level. So we have to acknowledge those pieces that this is kind of the starting ground for them. Then, I mean, they've been doing it for a while now, but they're seeing how far can they go? How far can they push? And then in those spaces, you'll meet other people who are of the same mind as you that you can connect with and be like, hey, let's connect, and you can build that solidarity together. And it might just be two of you, but it's better than just one of you. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah. And I think like if your school or local library or like a specific person within those spaces is doing something that's inclusive, like shouting them out like via email or like contact form or whatever it is, and then like copying the supervisor and like saying like this is needed and thank you, because we often hear the negativity rather than the positive. So there's that negativity bias. So if we can give that positive feedback and we can like let folks know that this is valuable and it does matter, whether it's like, stocking new LGBTQ books in a library or hosting a drag story hour or teaching like a lesson about different types of families, right? Like letting folks know that this is important and, to keep it up, because I think that doesn't happen nearly enough.
Yeah.
No, it definitely doesn't.
And you can also too just connect with your library, because a lot of libraries like are having books go missing, and so they can use any donations and things like that too. So if you're more of a mindset of donating, that might be what you lean into is the public library and be like, hey, what books have gone missing? Because a lot of our amazing books, that you're like these ones behind me and stuff are being checked out and then not returned to the library. And so that's something simple too you can do if you're not one to jump into a conversation or be on the ground looking for other ways like that. And that's a really easy, simple way. It's like, oh, here, I can donate this book to the library then.
Yeah. Downloading the app. Is it like 5 calls? I think it's called or something.
Yeah,
like
and then
that.
5 calls.
Yeah, because I get major anxiety talking on the phone, and so I use 5 calls to help me like do letters to reps and stuff like that, or emails. And that's really helpful, just like making sure that my voice gets heard, because again, like we just need to make people like see that this is important and we're not going to stop talking about it.
Yeah, 5 calls has become my best friend lately, because I don't like that either. Like every single time I go to call my reps, and I think this is an important thing for people to hear. You are not alone in this. Anytime I go to call my reps, my palms get sweaty. I like my voice starts to shake. I'm like, I have no problem talking to people ever, but for some reason when I go to do that, it's hard. It's gotten better because with practice and anything that we do with practice, it gets better. But 5 calls makes it easier than anything out there that I have seen. You literally pick what you want to call about. I've done like 5 in a day, like you can call about trans rights, you can call to demand a ceasefire, you can call about banning assault weapons. I mean, I'm for an entire abolition of all guns, but that is another podcast. But you can call about all of these things and it takes 10 minutes and at least you were doing something, because I keep going back to that Instagram post that I think probably all of us saw that said, but what can I do, said 7 billion people. We're in a society that wants us to think that we should give up, that our collective action and our collective voices is not doing anything. And that is a lie. So stop, thinking that your efforts are going nowhere, because it is doing something. And that's really hard sometimes when you are in advocacy spaces, because you do feel like it's not doing much, or you do feel alone. And I feel like you both brought up such good points when it comes to that. And I appreciate that so much. Where can people go to support you all?
Well, I'm teaching outside the binary on Instagram. I also have a website with a lot of free resources, including, if you don't mind if I plug this, the
Please
2024
do.
LGBTQ book lists are out. And yeah, and then we both share a Patreon called Growing Outside the Binary. We kind of melded our names together. But yeah, that's where you can find me and us. And then I know Skye has their own Instagram account.
Yeah, mine's Growing with Mixed Tea, and then also a website with some resources, but definitely not as cool as Aces. Um, and and yeah, then the Patreon. And and I will say, like, with our we try to make our membership as like accessible as possible now. So like any membership level you choose, it's more like a donation based type thing. You'll get access to all of the things we've created.
Yeah.
Because we try to create like lessons and ebooks. We've been a little bit like sluggish this year just because it's been a lot this year for both of us on a personal level and just on a macro federal level and state.
Yeah, that's really important. I appreciate you plugging that because education truly is under attack right now. And I'm so grateful that there are educators such as you all out there and anyone else who may be listening to this. Please, please, please follow those suggestions. If you are not in education, please show up at the school board meetings, as you both mentioned, because it takes all of us. Like
Yeah,
that it's your community and you should be involved and it should matter to you. And this is something that keeps coming back to me over and over and over again is the lack of understanding, whether it be in our country or whether it be globally, the lack of understanding that we are all interconnected, right? Like
hmm
all of these horrible things that keep happening, whether it be reproductive rights being taken away, whether it be books being banned, whether it be us funding more and more military weapons to kill innocent civilians in Gaza, whether it be just anything catastrophic that you can think of, we are all interconnected and all of this is fascism and people are not like connecting the dots on that. And I think that's where we lose our humanity. So
agreed.
I
Yeah.
kind of went on a tangent there.
That was a
No, it's
great
all
tangent though.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was
Yeah.
an amazing tangent. And you're so right. And it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, like we all have to understand everything that we're doing right now is connected.
Mm.
And you may not see, like I tell my kids all the time because like they time is abstract very much still to them because honestly it doesn't exist, so it's fine.
Mhm.
But like the idea that the civil rights just happened overnight, like they think it's just poof. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, that was a planned 13-year struggle. And that
Yeah.
was just the 13-year part,
It's
not
still
even talking about
ongoing
all the
in
years
many
before.
ways. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So like what we're looking at right now, we have to understand like this is not something that's going to happen immediately. And it's going to be small things that we do together consistently that's going to shape things and change things. So like the boycotts that are happening, they're working. Like
Mhm.
if they weren't working, we wouldn't be seeing everybody all of a sudden wanting to ban TikTok and
Mhm.
wanting to ban our voices or put, get rid of the woke act videos that are coming up, right? Like all of these things are connected, like they're saying right now, like that just came out that Starbucks stocks are plummeting right now because so many people are not buying from them and boycotting them. The little things like this are working but we all have to do it together. So we all have to together, call every day or go to the school board meetings. And, so it's very important what you were saying. It is all connected and we all need to work to understand that and find ways to work within our exhaustion and find each other and lean on each other in this time too because we can't do it alone but we're also not doing it alone and that's really hard to remember because we're meant to believe that we're just individualistic in these tiny boxes in society because that's what capitalism wants us to believe so that
Mhm.
we don't come together and we don't do these things. So once we break out of that mold and realize like, oh no, we're collective, we're all collectively together in this, I think we'll definitely see things happen at an even quicker rate, and we can push back and succeed against fascism because
Mhm.
it's here, it's been
Yeah.
here.
So true. So if both of you could give me a long or a short definition of what kindness is to you, that would be amazing.
I think kindness is um justice and breaking down barriers and making sure that everybody um feels welcome and works to make the world a more welcoming place.
So yeah, kindness is justice, and justice as in like everyone has a home and everyone is fed and everyone has healthcare. like it's not necessarily justice as we think of in white supremacy terms. It's justice as in that land back
Yep.
and that everyone is cared for. And because we have the ability to do that, you know, so it's just like, what can we imagine? That's kindness for me. It's like, what can we imagine? And then what steps can we work toward to that endpoint of what we've imagined? So.
Wouldn't that be beautiful? I want to be around for that day.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. And if we're not, then the next generation will have it, you know, like what we're doing. We're slowly getting there. Is the hope. So.
Yeah, I love to hear the hope. Thank you both so much. I really appreciated this conversation and needed it more than I knew today.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.